understanding is you had agreed, Mr. Chairman, that we would do 2 rounds of questions. So I'd like to address my first round of questions to Mr. Gensler, and then I'll use the second round for Mr. Chopra.
Yes, there will be 2 rounds. We discussed that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Mr. Gensler, just to start, I've got a couple of very simple questions. I think really basically yes or no questions. I recently wrote a letter to the acting chairman encouraging the SEC to undertake several non-controversial good government initiatives. I think you looked at that letter and described it to my staff as very thoughtful. Can you commit to us this morning to have the SEC evaluate whether or not to undertake the initiatives in my letter and report back to this committee in writing if you decide not to pursue any of them?
Senator Toomey, as we also discussed in the private meeting, I thought it was very helpful, a number of these initiatives, whether to shorten some of the settlement cycle and look at transfer agents. So I do look forward to, once confirmed, if confirmed, working with the staff of the SEC and working with your staff and you on these matters.
Okay, thanks. And I do hope that will include considering a faster settlement cycle on equities, because I think that's a big opportunity for us. Let me move on. The SEC, as you know, is currently reviewing a board diversity rule that NASDAQ is trying to impose on NASDAQ-listed companies. The rule would require their boards to have at least one woman and one person who identifies as a member of an underrepresented racial or ethnic group or LGBTQ, or to explain why they have failed to meet that requirement. As you may know, every Republican on this committee recently sent a letter to the SEC urging the SEC to disapprove of this proposed rule. While America's corporations certainly benefit from boards that have a diversity of perspectives and experiences, race, gender, and sexual orientation do not ensure any such diversity. Furthermore, the NASDAQ should not use its quasi-regulatory authority to impose social policies, and boards really should be acting in the shareholders' best interest to nominate simply the best, most qualified people as directors. Now, I understand I don't expect you to tell us this morning how you will vote, how you will rule on NASDAQ's specific board diversity rules. So let me just ask a more general question. Do you think that it's a good idea for company boards to be forced or pressured to comply with some kind of quota with respect to race, gender, and sexual orientation?
Senator, thank you. And I have taken a look at your letter, which is in a file, I think, of nearly 200 comments. And so I'll, if confirmed, we'll take that up amongst all of that. But on your more general question, I do think that diversity in boards and diversity in senior leadership, as I had answered the chairman earlier, benefits decision making, and it's something that I'm committed to at the SEC and the leadership there. And I think that it's a positive step forward in the leadership at the SEC that, if confirmed, I'm going to take on.
So when we spoke by phone recently, I think you committed to basing disclosure requirements on materiality, that they had to be grounded in materiality. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, Senator Toomey, that is.
I'm almost out of time here. So let me just say, so if a company, a business, a publicly traded company spends a financially insignificant amount of money on, let's say, electricity, is it material whether that electricity came from renewable sources or not?
Senator, I think materiality, as the Supreme Court has said, is about, it's got to be significant to the mix of information to a reasonable investor. And I think that test will always ground our economic analysis and how we move forward on this. In your hypothetical, it may not be material, or it may be material depending on the total mix of information.
So even though it's financially insignificant in my hypothetical, you think it could still be material?
I think that materiality is the total mix of information, and often a small piece of information is not material. You're right about that, but I would have to take it into context of the entire mix of information.
Well, I would just suggest that if it is financially insignificant, I don't see how it could be material. Let me ask a different question. Apple's revenue last year was, I think, about $274 billion. If Apple spent $1 million on political spending on issue ads, would that be material, something that ought to have to be disclosed?
What we found is materiality is defined is what reasonable investors are seeking to have to make their decisions either to invest or not to invest, or to vote yes or vote no. And last year's proxy season, I think, shares with us that many investors, well over 40% of investors in those proxy votes, actually think that that would be material to get such information.
So even though it's completely insignificant, couldn't possibly affect any financial results whatsoever, you think it might be okay to mandate that disclosure?
I will be grounded in economic analysis, and the court's view of materiality is what investors, reasonable investors, want in the significant mix of
That's here. It looks like his name's up there.
And sorry.
But if this is financially insignificant information, and some investors would like to have it, why not leave it up to the companies to decide whether to disclose it and thereby ingratiate themselves with investors who care about it?
Well, Senator, I think that it's about investors making a choice as to what's significant, or what's material, to be more accurate, what's material for those investors. I will always be grounded in the courts and the law and the economic analysis about materiality, what reasonable investors are seeking when they make decisions to invest or not to invest, or vote yes or vote no.
The last question. There are two recent rulemakings by the SEC. One requires proxy voting advisory firms to provide investors with more transparent, accurate, and complete information about their business. The other modernized the thresholds to limit the ability of shareholders to just harass companies with repeated failed special interest proposals. Do you have plans to revisit these rules, or do you intend to leave them as they are?
Senator, if confirmed, I would want to work with the staff and the economists and fellow commissioners to understand those rules better, to see whether, for instance, in the proxy advisory area, has it addressed the potential conflicts of interest at the least amount of cost, and see if it's positive in achieving the mission of the agency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.